Today I'm going to take a look at some flexible neon rope tube from BTF Lighting in preparation for a larger project that I have planned that will be my first outdoor install and my largest single LED installation. So hang around. Hi, welcome to Resin Chem Tech. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm currently in the planning stages for what will be my largest single LED install. I'm actually planning on installing LEDs around the entire perimeter of our screened-in porch. That will also mean taking down this fixture and putting up an enclosure to hold my power supply and my controller. However, this is controlled by a wall switch, so we'll be installing a Shelly 1 relay behind this switch. But since this is going to be an outdoor install, everything needs to have some level of weather resistance or be waterproof. So when BTF Lighting reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in taking a look at some of their products, one thing that jumped out at me was this neon rope tube, which is IP67 or waterproof rated. Now, I'm very familiar with BTF products, having used their WS2812B pixel strips in almost all of my projects as long as they're JST connectors, but I wanted to take a look at this and see if it was going to meet my needs. So in this video, I'm going to go through unboxing, cutting the tube, installing the LEDs, and then we're going to compare it in terms of diffusion and brightness with standard aluminum channel. As always, you can find links here along the timeline and down in the video description if you wish to jump forward to a particular part of the video. Let's get started. Okay, so this is our neon tubing. It did ship from Hong Kong. It arrived in right at 1 week, but that was over the 4th holiday weekend as well. There's 15 meters or just a little over 147 feet in here, so let's cut this open and see what we have. All right, I can tell you it is very well taped up. The whole box is taped. No exposed cardboard whatsoever to this, so take a little work here to we can get this cut open. There we go. And we have a huge bundle of our neon tubing. Let's open this up, and we see we do have 3 individual packages here. Again, very well wrapped. Does come with some end caps here, which is good. So take this off here and see how a LED strip might fit inside. Okay, so I've pulled one of these out, and I've cut back just a little bit. I don't want to open it all the way up yet for fear it's going to spring out, but I also need to find out if I need to lay it flat for a while. But the first thing I noticed was a little bit interesting. I don't know how well you can see this, but it looks like there is a pull string that's coming out of actually both ends of this. Really can't see the other end here, but I guess that's going to be a pull string to help us get the LEDs through there. And I was just a little bit curious, so I did go out and grab a small strip of LEDs just to try to get an idea of how well these are going to fit in here. And it does slide in there pretty easily, so that is encouraging, but my guess is it starts to get a little tight as it tries to get around these bends, and so maybe that's where that pull string is going to help. Also, when I took these clips out of the bag, there's one of these for each 15 meter length. There are 2 end caps we can see here for our wiring. These other ones appear to be mounting clips, which is a really nice thing to have. I think you'll be able to mount those and then simply slide these on and clip them into place. So all in all, I'm very impressed. These do appear to be relatively thick, so I think it's going to do a really good job of diffusing the LEDs, although I am going to be curious to see with that kind of thickness how much it might impact the brightness level of the LEDs. Okay, so I went ahead and unwrapped one of these, and by the way, I want to say thank you to BTF Lighting, who did send me the 15 meters of this neon tubing. They did also send me 15 meters of WS2812B 60 pixels per meter strips for me to use. So while this stuff, if you notice, it's fairly flexible. It will bend. It doesn't flex much this way, but you can do fairly tight corners. But since my total install is going to be somewhere around 45 feet, I'm going to have to use multiple runs of this. So I'm actually going to cut this into straight lengths for each of the 4 sides. But before I do that, what I want to do is I'm going to cut a section of this off, and I'm going to try to install some LEDs in it. And I want to compare it to my standard diffuser that I use in most of my indoor projects. This is that aluminum channel with that diffuser. So I want to cut the length out of this, put LEDs in both, and compare them side by side for both diffusion and for light level. Okay, I've marked off a length of about 25 inches, the same length as my aluminum channel, so we can compare side by side. I'm going to cut this, but there's a couple of things I was thinking about. First of all, I've got this, again, this pull string through here. So when I cut this, I want to be careful to make sure I'm still going to have pull string at each end to be able to pull through. So I've got to be aware of that. Plus, I was thinking as I install the LEDs, I can install my wiring on one end as I feed it through. I'm not going to be able to put the wire on this end because I don't think I would be able to feed it. But I'm going to be able to have to be able to pull this through enough, put my wires on this end, then pull it back so that the wires connections, my solder joints, are inside of the tube when I put the end caps on. So that's another reason I'm doing this now before we do the big project. But let's start out and see. I'm just going to try a box knife first. No idea how well this is going to cut. We're going to see if we can cut through this with this. Okay, that seems to be cutting fairly well so far. Try to keep a straight cut. And again, I do want to try to be careful of that string. I can see it in there. Try my best not to cut the string. At least not yet. I'm going to have to cut it. Okay, so there's my pull string. Good news is it does cut fairly easy. So what I'm going to try and do now, see if I can get a little bit of that pull string pulled back from this other end, since I have plenty of slack here, and give me a little bit of slack on both ends when I cut that. Okay, so now I can pull some back and make sure I cut this string so I have at least a little bit coming out of each end. We're going to pull this up to about there. So I still have some left out of there, and I'll have a little bit on each end here. So let me go ahead and cut that. Okay. Now I can cut the rest of the way through my tubing here. Actually, it looks like it's going to just come right apart. There we go. Okay, so now I have a little bit of pull string left at each end here, and a little bit of pull string. Can't quite pull that yet because this is probably because it's still all coiled up. I'm actually going to tape that off here in a second just to make sure that that doesn't get sucked back up inside the tube. Okay, so I went ahead and cut two identical length strips of WS2812B strips, and I've soldered leads onto the data in on each end of these strips. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the aluminum channel, but with the aluminum channel, if I had wires coming out to connect to the next part of a strip, I could obviously solder my wires on ahead of time, or I could technically even solder them on once it's in the aluminum channel. But I'm not going to be able to do that with the one that's going to go in our tube, because I'm going to need to feed this end through the tube, and having wires here is going to, I think, would make that nearly impossible. Now I have cut this a little bit shorter by about 1 pixel because I do want to be able to see, can I pull this through the neon rope tube, be able to solder wires, and then be able to pull it back through. So I wanted it to be a little bit shorter than the overall length. So this is done. We will eventually put this diffuser on here, and we're going to test that. But first, let's see if we can get the LEDs through our tube. Okay, now the first thing the instructions say to do is to remove the double-sided tape from the back of the strip. Now, as you're probably aware, these LED strips have adhesive on the back, so you can stick them up anywhere, although the adhesive isn't all that great. And so normally you would peel that back. But in this case, we actually want to flip this around here so you can see a little bit better. We're going to completely remove the double-sided tape off the back of this. So actually, once you get it started, it actually comes off fairly easily. So again, we don't want to damage the strip, so we'll just gently rip that off. I'm going to tear it off here without leaving too much of it behind. And you see we do still have some residue left on here. Try to get that off as best we can. I think you need to remove this not only for the thickness that it adds, but obviously we don't want the sticky stuff on here, because that's going to make it a lot harder to bring it through that tube. Okay, so we've got that off of there, but it's still, as you can tell, pretty tacky and sticky. Now the instructions actually show using an eraser, so that's what I'm going to try here first, is just using a little bit of eraser along the back of this. I do want to be a little bit careful not to damage the strip. I want to feel that, and it does seem to be taking some of the stickiness away. So I'm going to work this eraser down through here and see how much of this stickiness we can get off of this. Okay, I've worked this with the eraser and have most of the tackiness off. By the way, I did try first isopropyl alcohol, and then I tried a little acetone. Don't do that. It just actually made things worse by smearing this out. Maybe there's a technique, and I'll have to experiment, because when I tried this earlier with another strip, the double-sided tape came off cleanly and left no residue and no stickiness whatsoever. So I have to see if there's a better way to peel that off, especially when I'm going to start dealing with 12-foot lengths of this strip. But at this point, we're ready to tie this off and see if we can pull it through our neon rope tubing. So I've now tied a knot around here, around that first pixel. It's relatively tight. And we can see the other end here. I'm going to try to start feeding this through here. It's a little bit of a challenge to try to push and pull at the same time. To be honest, if I lay this flat, try to get this as flat as I can, it's actually sliding through here quite easily. So I'm not sure if I'm really going to need the pull string here, but we'll see if we can use the pull string. There we go. All right, that's actually working quite well. We'll just keep pulling that down through. Keep this again as flat as we can. Pull that. Okay, now we see I've got the wires right here. And again, now I need to be able to get this in there far enough that I can pull the other end out to solder wires onto the other end. So we seem to be hung up a little bit right here. There we go. Now I got it past the end. We're snagged a little bit. There we go. Okay, so that's good. We've got it all the way through there. I can pull this far enough out. I still have the wires from this end I should be able to pull back. So now I can remove my string and solder to that. I'm going to leave the string there for now. Again, if I were going to solder something on there, and then I should simply be able to pull this back far enough and pull it inside so that both of my connections are inside of my end caps. Now that I've got my LEDs installed in the BTF neon rope tubing, I have the same number of LEDs installed in this aluminum channel, and what I've done is I've connected them both to this controller. This is going to be my WLED controller, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the actual install of this project. But sharp eye people will notice I'm using an ESP32 here instead of an 8266. Again, I'll talk about why I'm doing that. For now, just know that I'm taking the single signal out of this, and I'm actually splitting it and running the same signal to both strips. That way we'll be sure that we're getting the same brightness level, the same signal, the same effects and colors sent to both strips simultaneously. So let me dim the lights here and see what I can do with the cameras to try to compare these side by side. Okay, here are both strips powered up. Notice that I've had to turn the brightness all the way down to dim so it doesn't overwhelm the cameras. But right off the start, you can see that you can still see some individual pixels on the neon rope, but they are definitely much softer and less defined than they are here on the aluminum channel. Let's just try a couple different colors here just to make sure there's no real difference there. Again, definitely softer on the neon tube, and I think that if you went with 100 or 144 pixels per meter, this would be almost solid and you wouldn't see the individual pixels at all, although they would also be less defined on the aluminum channel. So let's try a couple of quick effects here, just to take a look at that as well. And there's our candy cane effect. Again, definitely softer and less defined on the neon rope tubing than on the aluminum channel. Let's try one more. Overall, and I can tell you that by looking at this, the brightness is just slightly less on the neon rope tubing, but they're pretty close. I just think that being able to see the individual pixels gives you kind of the brighter hot spots for the individual pixels, whereas definitely more even on the neon rope tubing. So now let's talk about a few other pros and cons regarding each of these two options. First of all, the LED channel is primarily going to be available in two different form factors. What you see here is more or less the L-shaped or flat form factor. That's pretty much where your lights are going to shine directly this direction. They do make some difference in terms of depth and diffusers that would help soften some of those individual pixels, so you can get this a little bit deeper. But the only other option is this L shape that's going to have your lights shining more or less at a 45-degree angle off of there. That's pretty much the only options you have with the aluminum channel. There might be some others out there, but these are going to be the most common. The BTF Neon Rope Tube, however, comes in over 30 different shapes, flavors, and sizes, depending on how you want to diffuse that light. In my case here, with the end, if I can pull it up here and show it, my light is going to diffuse out in these two directions. Basically, no light is going to come out of the back, and I didn't show that, but I did look at it. The light is pretty much blocked here. So again, if you look at this picture, you can customize the direction that you want your light to go. And again, they make this for different size LED strips, and again, all these different shapes and sizes depending on how you want to diffract or reflect your light. Okay, so next let's talk waterproof or IP ratings. This aluminum channel is, I couldn't find an actual IP rating, but it is listed for indoor use only. And we're talking about just the enclosures themselves. We're not talking about all the things you would have to do with your controller and your wiring. This is rated for indoor use. I know some people have put these outside up underneath the eave of their house, but theoretically any kind of direct water could definitely seep inside the edges of this channel. The neon rope tubing, however, is IP67 rated, which means it can theoretically be submerged into water, I think for up to 30 minutes, 1 meter. But this is definitely going to be fine in any kind of outdoor weather, direct exposure to rain or anything like that. So, if you're looking for an outdoor install, this is, again, not rated for outdoor use. This can be used pretty much directly outdoors in terms of any weather. And of course, one of the biggest differences here is going to be flexibility. Obviously, this aluminum channel is only going to work on flat surfaces for straight runs, while our neon rope tubing can obviously be bent into fairly tight corners, could be wrapped around things. Again, it's going to bend into fairly tight corners this direction. It's not going to have a lot of flexibility in the other direction, but once we have our LEDs in there, we can pretty much wrap this around and make it pretty tight for any kind of corners that we want. But of course, that flexibility could come with a little bit of a trade-off depending on exactly where and how you're going to install these. Obviously, this is very rigid, so if you're going to have a rather long run of this on really any kind of surface, you're only going to need a couple of mounting clips, maybe at each end or one or two in the middle. It's not going to sag on you. This, however, depending on, again, how you're going to install it, might need more clips to hold it flush, especially if you're going to mount this underneath the surface to stop it from sagging. Again, it has really good, it's very rigid this direction, so you would be fine there. But again, underneath the surface, it might take a few more mounting clips to make sure that you don't get any sag. And while I covered this a little bit before, it's worth mentioning again in terms of ease of installation. Now, it's definitely easier in terms of these aluminum channels because I can pre-wire everything before I do the install, or even necessary remove or pull my diffuser back and wire. I could also go ahead and pre-wire JST connectors if I want to do that before I ever do the install. Not quite so with this neon rope tubing. Because of having to pull our LED strip through here, we can go ahead and pre-wire one end, but we're really going to have to pull that other end through like I showed before to be able to pull this through to get to the other end. We can't put all of our wiring on before, and definitely could not put a JST connector on before because we're never going to be able to pull that through this neon rope tubing. So in terms of ease of installation of our LED strips, the winner here has to be the aluminum channel. So finally, let's talk about cost. The BTF Neon Rope Tube cost varies greatly depending on the particular style that you're using. On a per meter basis, it runs anywhere from about $3 per meter all the way up to about $12 per meter. This particular style that I'm using here runs you about $7 per meter. The aluminum channel, this particular style, and again, the cost will vary greatly depending on the current cost of aluminum, but as of the time of this recording, 20 meters of this will cost you around $75. So that works out to be about $375 per meter. So what I'm looking at here today is $375 per meter for the aluminum channel versus about $7 per meter for the BFT neon rope tubing. Now let me clarify something before people light up the comments. When I mentioned that this aluminum channel was not rated for outdoor use, What I meant, it's not rated for outdoor use alone if you're using WS2812 IP30 strips, which are also for indoor use. This isn't going to give you the weather protection that you need. However, if you want to spend the extra money for IP65 or IP67 WS2812B or other pixel strips, by all means you can use this aluminum channel. This in and of itself is not going to provide any kind of waterproofing. So you really have a choice. You can spend more money for the pixel strips and use a little bit cheaper enclosure, or you can spend a little bit more money on the waterproof enclosure and less money on your LED strips. I hope that clarifies things just a bit. So there is one final thing I should mention. Currently, the Neon Rope Tube from BTF Lighting is not available in the US Amazon store, but you can get it directly from their website, and I'll leave a link to that along with a couple of the other things that I showed down in the video description. But I think for my purposes, the Neon Rope Tube is going to be an ideal fit for my large outdoor project. So if you're interested in seeing the video of that project and that installation, you can hit that subscribe button and ding that little bell icon, and you'll be notified when I release that video along with any other new videos. And if you found anything in this video that you liked, hit that like button. That lets both me and YouTube know that you'd like to see more videos like this. As always, I would like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.